Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the AP US Government and Politics series on AP for Teens. Today, as I mentioned last time, we're going to start off by talking about the Constitutional Convention. So let's get started with a little review. In the last video, we talked about two things, the Articles of Confederation and the pros and cons of the Articles. Now today, we're going to be discussing something different. We're going to discuss the thing that led to after the Articles failed, the Constitutional Convention. We're going to discuss what the Constitutional Convention was, the major decisions of the convention, the divide that occurred afterwards. So let's get started. Now, immediately before roll call, there was already an argument between the different groups in the Constitutional Convention, and that was divided on what to do with the Articles itself. The people of the convention were divided on what to do about the Articles. Some people decided to scrap it completely. They said that it was completely pointless to keep it and we had to erase it and restart. Other people said keep it the same, and changing it infringed on the rights of states and people, according to them. Now, historians are divided on the point of the convention in the first place. Some historians believe that it was to protect these delegates' rights, and some believe that it was to protect everyone, including the delegates' rights. Now, today, people are kind of confused and still are kind of divided on what the point of the convention was, but nevertheless it happened and it resulted in a lot of different changes in US government. As you can see there, those are the things that happened. It eventually scrapped completely, and people are generally assuming that most historians believe that it's to protect everyone's rights. Now, after that, it led to different arguments about how to control the new federal legislature that was being created. Because if you remember last time, they did have a legislature, but it wasn't exactly the best national legislation. Now, larger states created the Virginia Plan, headed by, of course, Virginia delegates, where population determined the representation in the delegation. Now, smaller states followed New Jersey's idea. New Jersey decided that all states should be equal and each have an equal representation in the legislative branch. So all states have, in their case, 2 delegates. Now, the Great Compromise, which is also called the Connecticut Compromise, created a new plan, a plan that would combine both the large state and small state perspective. This idea would have a bicameral or 2-house legislature, with the House of Representatives having population influencing the power, and the Senate, where power is equal, and that's continued to this day. The next big question that happened in the convention was the discussion of slavery. Are slaves people or are they property? Now, according to the rule book of the time, according to life at the time, slaves were not people, they were property. But slaveholders threw that all out the window when related to their population. They decided that that the North, where there were few slaves, they believed that slaves shouldn't count as people, they counted as property, to make sure that the North had more power because there weren't any slaves to begin with. The South, on the opposite hand, with a lot more slaves, said that slaves did count as people because they were living, breathing human beings, even if they were treated miserably and counted as property in every other aspect. They created a compromise, the 3/5 compromise, which is probably the worst compromise in the history of the United States, where a slave was worth 3/5 of a non-slave person. So as you can see, non-slaves versus slaves here, this is basically the equal representation, which obviously doesn't show equality under the law. But this is the times, and that's how they believed it to work. Now, what else was added in the Constitutional Convention? There were a couple of big things that happened. Number one, they created the president, and in fact, they created a brand new executive branch of government to be able to help execute the laws. They also created a national Supreme Court, which is now seen even to this day. Then we had a discussion between the feds and the anti-feds. Now, the states had to ratify the Constitution. 9 of the 13 states had to. And as always, there were 2 different opinions on ratifying the Constitution. The Federalists believed that the Constitution was a great idea, the laws were already there, let's just sign it and move on. The Anti-Federalists, however, didn't exactly believe this. They thought that there should be more rules involved. The Federalist Papers, written by 3 different people in particular, although other people influenced it as well, the big people Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, supported the Constitution and were published in newspapers to persuade the states to ratify the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists had a couple of problems with the Constitution. They believed that the Constitution would threaten the citizens' personal liberties. They believed that the rights had to be placed directly in the Constitution rather than being assumed. Federalists thought that people would just assume that certain rights were available, and so there wasn't any need to write down every single law. Anti-Federalists did not believe that was the case. They eventually added the Bill of Rights, which is seen here. The Bill of Rights, which were a list of the major laws that would be allowed and government protection, people protections from the government to be able to make sure that they wouldn't have their rights infringed. Because of the Bill of Rights, the Anti-Federalist argument basically disappeared, and the Constitution was soon ratified by all 13 states to form the government that we now know today. Thank you very much for watching this episode. As always, subscribe, leave a comment, or like all in the sections below. Answer the question in the comment section below just to make sure that you understand the topic and bring your own opinion. Thank you very much for watching. As always, make sure that you watch the next video and take care.